Well, thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Ana Maria Franco. For those who don't know me, I am the International Relations Coordinator of our school. Today we have two very special guests, Keeley Álvarez, which will be introducing herself in a minute, and also Professor Robert Jones from the Department of Government of the University of Essex. In your screen, you're seeing the agenda for today. We're going to start with very quick welcoming remarks from my side and from the University of Essex, following by a presentation of the masters that are included in our agreement, our cooperation agreement, the one we signed and shared with you not long ago. And then that will be followed by the lecture that will be imparted by Professor Jones on post-verdad, a post-truth in today's politics and the resistance of the facts, or what the resistance seems to be of the facts in today's politics. So thank you very much again, Keeley and Robert Jones, for this space. Yeah, I know it's Friday and it's Friday evening over in England, so I appreciate it very much. Thank you all students that took time from their timetables to be here. And that's it from my side. Keeley, if you would like to perhaps open the space. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Ana Maria. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. As Ana Maria says, my name is Keeley Álvarez and I'm the representative for the Latin American region here at the University of Essex. So I basically help students with the admissions process and also kind of the lead person in relation to this partnership with Rosario as well. So yeah, really happy to see lots of people joining the session. I can already recognize some of your names that I've been in contact with some of you, so that's great. And yeah, obviously this session is going to be more about Professor Johns giving you a bit more insight into the department and giving you a guest lecture. But if you do have any questions relating to the partnership or anything at all, I'm going to stay on the call in case there are any questions at all at the end. So yeah, I think over to Professor Johns. And again, thanks very much everyone for joining.
Laura, please stop sharing your screen so Professor Jones can start sharing his screen. Thank you very much.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you. I should apologise first of all for wearing it's so rare for me to wear a shirt in lockdown times that I forgot that some of them don't react so well with cameras. So apologies for any vision problems that you have as a result of me wearing too stripy a shirt. And actually, I'm going to have to close the window straight away because there's somebody's just started drilling. So hold one sec. I'll be talking later about the unnaturally good weather that we have in Essex as opposed to large parts of the UK, and today is a good example. It's extremely sunny and warm, and so more windows were open than would normally be the case. Anyway, enough of my introductory drivelling. Let's get on to what you're here for, part one, which is basically a brief introduction to what it's like to study for a master's degree in the Department of Government at the University of Essex. I will sometimes use the phrase PGT, which is our shorthand. It stands for postgraduate taught, but it essentially means the master's programme. My contact details will recur at the end, so don't worry if you don't note them down now, but there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions. And please do feel free to put anything in the chat. I've kind of done enough online teaching now that I'm just about able to talk and have a look in the chat from time to time.
I can help you out as well if you want with the
perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to start with a quick sales pitch before getting into the details. So these are 5 things about Essex, and one of the subjects of my talk later will be the status of the facts in our political and everyday life. But for the purposes of this presentation, assume that there absolutely are such things as facts. Some things are uncontestably or incontestably true, and here are 5 about the Department of Government at the University of Essex. The first of which is that if you take the British government's assessment of departments at their word, then it's the best department in the country, and has been ever since they began these assessments of research in politics and international studies. This goes back to 1986, and they do this roughly every 7 years, and in every one of these assessments, Essex has been top. And when I was first told this, I reacted with mild surprise, because you usually expect the best university to be Cambridge or Oxford or something like that. But when it comes to politics, it's Essex. I'm very pleased to be able to say. The government rates research via this REF that I've just been talking about. It rates teaching via the Teaching Excellence Framework, or TEF. And Essex as a university, they do this at a university level, was rated gold. So for research and teaching, we're doing as well as we possibly can in the eyes of Her Majesty's government. There are similarly high ratings if we broaden this out to world rankings of politics departments. And when I say that we're in one of the world's top 30, you can already guess that we're probably going to be 20 something, maybe 20 something quite high. And as we'll be showing later, yeah, we were 29th in the latest world university rankings for politics and international studies. In other words, known around the world, not just as a good department within the UK. If you don't trust any of these rankings and you only really trust Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, then you'll be pleased to know that the Regius Professorship, which is essentially when Her Majesty or her advisors decide that one department excels in a subject, you have the Regius Professor of Ancient History at Cambridge and the Regius Professor of Physics at Imperial College. But for political science, Essex hosts the Regius Professorship, and one of my colleagues, Professor Christian Gleditsch, is the Regius Professor of Political Science. And then 5th, a different kind of fact, but I think just as important one, is that in terms of the academic staff, there are about 50 people like me, that is lecturers in the Department of Government at the University of Essex, and I am boringly British by comparison with my colleagues. It's a hugely cosmopolitan set. If I think about going along the corridor from where I sit, it's a German, then a Norwegian, then a Mexican, then a Bolivian, then another Brit, then a Greek, and so on and so on. It's a hugely international place, and that extends to the student body. Of our master's cohort, on average about 5% are British, about 30% are from elsewhere, what we used to call elsewhere in the European Union, and the remainder are from all over the place. And we have incidentally had a large number of Colombian students over the years. I can think of at least 3 PhD students in the last 5 years who were from Colombia. So, but you won't be coming to meet Colombians, you'll be coming to meet people from all over the place if you come to Essex. So that's kind of the sales bit done. Now let's get on to the information. This is a list of the master's programs in the department. Most masters fall into one of 2 kinds. You can do an MA or an MSc. The difference between them is that the MSc involves more advanced quantitative methods or statistical methods. The MA involves some, typically, but not so much. 3 of our master's programs come in an MRes version. That's a Master of Research, and that's a 2-year program that involves more by way of research methods and is in a sense seen as more like a preparation for a PhD, as opposed to an MA or an MSc, which can be a preparation for a PhD, but is also oriented towards a job. This blob contains the 9 courses that are contained within the progression agreement that we have with Rosario. So we have some new degrees, and I don't know, this is above my pay level to decide what goes into these things, but maybe this will widen to include some of our newer degrees in time, but for the moment it still gives you quite a choice to go through. I'm happy to answer questions about specific degrees. I don't really obviously have time to kind of talk about each of them for for 2 minutes, but you will grasp the substance from the name of the Masters. What I'll do is talk more about the structure of a Master's degree in general, and then if you have specific questions, I'll be happy to handle them after this part. So the list of modules that you will do, where modules are the kind of sub-subjects within your Masters, you can easily find that on the University of Essex website. If you just type in the name of your chosen Master's programme into the website, it's very well set up for searching for degrees, because we want people to come and do degrees. So we're very much making it accessible for you. There's a kind of list of the kind of optional modules that you might see in the Master's programme, but they look different from the list that I've just shown you. And that's because the way that the Master's programme works is that you will do 4 modules, basically. Each of them will be 2 or 3 hours a week. It's not, incidentally, a huge amount of contact time by the standard of some countries. The British model is very much based on some teaching, but lots of reading, as opposed to, say, the French or the Spanish model of going to university. But you would, for each of these modules, do probably a 2-hour seminar, or if it was a very big module, it might be that there would be a half an hour or an hour lecture, and then there would be more of the discussion part. And those 4 will be the core module, and by the core module, I mean the name of your degree. So if you're doing international relations as a Master's, your core module will be international relations. You'll do a research methods module. That's the one that I mentioned. If you're doing an MSc, it will be more advanced quantitative. If you're doing an MA, it will be more less advanced quantitative, but also some qualitative methods and things like that. You'll probably do a module in political theory or philosophy, although it doesn't tend to be like Aristotle and Plato. It tends to be much more contemporary political philosophy. Or it may be, because some of the international relations module, Masters and conflict resolution have a slightly different structure, you may not have to do a theory module. But then when it comes to optional modules, those are the things you see and some examples of on the right-hand side. And I've tried to pick out the ones that we generally find popular, but it's not a full list of all the things that you might do. Now, the point I want to emphasize about this is that, let's say you're a student in international relations and one of your friends is doing conflict resolution. It could quite easily be that you do the same modules, because what is core for you is the other person's option, and vice versa. All of which is a way of saying, don't agonize too much about the choice of degree title. You don't need to expend too much emotional energy on that. A, because it won't absolutely determine the modules you do. You'll still have these options. And B, kind of bonus information, employers or potential PhD programs, they don't really care that much about the title of your degree. They care much more about how well you do in it and any other work experience, internship, or whatever you might have accumulated. So choose what's interesting to you and have a look at what options you can do to make it maximally interesting, would be my advice on that. So, as well as all that, what this taught bit basically goes on between October and around May. Some of the modules will have exams in May and June, others will not, depending on the kind of content. Some lend themselves to exams more than some lend themselves more to essays, coursework. My guess is that the average master's student, about 60% of their marks come from coursework and about 40% come from exams, but it will vary a bit across course. Then you spend the summer completing your dissertation, which is a 10,000 word piece of work designed to be rather like an academic journal article. And the dissertation is a very important part of what we do for master's students. It's very much seen as the kind of crowning moment of your studies. And so it's not a case of you just are told you've got to do a dissertation, see you in September. You get very close supervision with your dissertation, both from an individual member of staff who knows that area well, but also there are a series of workshops for everyone, or maybe specific to an area like international relations or public opinion where you work with other students who are doing their dissertations in that kind of area. So the point I'm making basically is we give you a lot of support to try and do that as well as you can, because it counts quite heavily in your overall master's mark. And your supervisor, but for that matter, all members of staff have these academic support hours where we're just sitting there waiting for, keen to be visited and asked questions about whatever it is you're doing. Now, one thing I'll say, reverting to my sales bit, is that I mentioned there are about 50 members of staff in the department, and there are on average each year between 120 and 150 master's students, which means that every member of staff has between 2 and 3 students on average to supervise. That's kind of good from your point of view, because if I take a competitor at random, the University College London, the average member of staff has between 12 and 15 students that they supervise. And you're going to get a less good service from somebody who has that many people to supervise, almost however willing and committed they are. There are places, the UCL, the LSE, these are world-leading institutions. There are many advantages to having master's degrees from them, but they are places where they put a huge number of people on seats, and you don't get quite the same personal service as you would from a somewhat smaller cohort of the kind that you'll find at Essex and some other places too. So there are basically kind of 4 areas that I just want to either provide documentary evidence to what I said at the start, or go into a bit more detail about why we think it's good studying for a master's at Essex. There's just the proof that this TEF rating of gold that I was boasting about at the start, I just feel obliged to put some kind of thing that shows that I'm not making this stuff up. And there's the evidence of the TEF. I mentioned, well, let's take a brief detour to the more difficult subject of quite what teaching will look like in the next year or so. Obviously, we have been severely affected, as any university anywhere, by the pandemic. And at this time of year, it's very much a kind of prediction game, quite what things will look like, both in the country as a whole and in a university for the next academic year. I don't know whether the people that I'm talking to today might be coming to Essex in 2021, or it would be more further down the line. If it's basically, if nobody's planning to be in Essex in October 2021, I'm happy to just not talk about this, because everything will be back to normal and great by the time you do arrive. But in case there is somebody who might be in Essex within 6 months, I can say a little bit about what the plans are. We do aim to have classrooms open and people like me and people like you in them in October. It's going to be less possible. In fact, it's going to be impossible for huge lectures, but our master's program doesn't involve many lectures. So it's much more feasible that your teaching can be in a classroom, and especially on the more specialized subjects, there are maybe only 10 or 15 students, in which case we have classrooms big enough for everybody to sit the right distance away. But we are obliged to say that depending on the development of the pandemic, it may be that we have to do what we did this year, which was to have lectures recorded and the discussions being online. And I think the only other thing I want to say about this, other than emphasizing that the university's aim is very much to get people in the classroom, so you kind of don't need to worry. The incentive structure, for various financial reasons I won't go into, is very strong for the university to have teaching going on in classrooms. So you don't need to worry about the university desperately wanting you all to stay away. That's not really the pattern at all. But the only other thing I wanted to add is that next year will, without question, be better than this year, basically because we've all had a year of learning how to do this. And hopefully by the end of this year, learning how to do it really well. So if it is the case that there's more online than you or I would like, rest assured at least that it's a practiced version of online that we've all kind of got the hang of. And this extends to the students as well, of course, as the academic staff. Next up on excellence in research, here's the documentary evidence of a bewildering multicolour kind. In the bottom right, you have this research excellence framework, and there's the evidence of Essex being top in the country, Oxford in 4th, Cambridge nowhere to be seen, all of which shows that what you might expect is not always what a subject-specific league table looks like. You've got our 29th in the QS World University Rankings, and then there's a thing called the Council for World University Rankings, which obviously I prefer because Essex is 10th in the world in that, rubbing shoulders with Harvard and Yale and the like. In terms of what happens outside the classroom, there's too much really for me to say in the time available. Suffice to say that a lot happens. Because of the fact that the number of master's students is kind of manageable, like I say, about 120 in an average year. That's small enough to be a bit like a village. Lots of the master's students do know each other really well. It's a very sociable place for master's students. And then, of course, there's lots of things that we provide, whether it's careers networking events or there's an annual student conference, which I'll talk about in a second. There's lots of clubs and societies, all the things that you might expect. Obviously, some of this stuff, like busy and sociable common room, also depends somewhat on pandemic development, but hopefully things will be back to something resembling normal pretty soon. And then this fourth area, what will happen after your master's degree, and really you won't be surprised to learn that it's not exactly a pure random sample of destinations that I've chosen here, but I've chosen the ones that I think sound the most exciting. But these show what is possible for and indeed quite feasible for graduates from our master's programs. And what tends to happen because of the university being very strong in research is that the kinds of jobs that our graduates go on to do are called things like researcher or analyst. That's the kind of skills that we're giving people in the master's program. And so whether it's working or whether it's doing a PhD at a very strong institution, we see ourselves as training you basically to do very high level research. And in the bottom right of the screen, you see an example of something that's by no means the only example of it, which is an article co-authored by one of our recent master's students who, in fact, I taught doing the master's with a colleague of mine, writing an article that was published in the Journal of Politics, which is a very high-ranking journal within the discipline. And that kind of thing is a huge boost to the CV. If you do a great dissertation, there's every chance that you'll be able to publish it. And that's kind of big. And as I mentioned, we have this student conference, which is at the end of the year. And the aim of that is that you present your dissertation research, or that you present your ongoing research to practice those skills that employers want to know that you can exercise. Okay, one last thing I'm going to talk about. I mentioned it already. The weather in the UK does not have the best reputation worldwide. There is the University of Essex. This is a map of rainfall. The darkest brown is the driest part of the UK. And so if you were contemplating going to do a master's in Manchester or Glasgow, there are many advantages to those places, but don't expect to go outside very often. Whereas in Essex, it's technically a semi-arid climate, I'm told by Wikipedia. So if you fancy a bit of sunshine UK style, this is the place to come. Okay, I think that's enough from me for this phase. So I've left a small amount of time, at least, on the schedule for questions, and I don't need to use absolutely the whole time for the lecture. So there's definitely 5 minutes minimum for any questions anybody has about anything I've just been speaking about. And you can put them in the chat, or you can, in the dream scenario, unmute and reveal yourselves.
Or raise your hand with the option. Oh yeah, we see a hand raised. Is Santiago. Go ahead, Santiago.
Oh, okay. Good morning, everybody. my question is not about the content. I think it was pretty clear, but about the terms and of the application process. What is the deadline for submitting my application?
Keeley, by all means, weigh in on this if you.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, so our official deadline is the 27th of August. However, as far as I'm aware, Ana Maria, you also have a kind of internal deadline that you're supposed to meet. Is that right?
Yeah, for progression agreement with the University of Essex, we have established the application period to be from October to May of the next year. So we will be receiving application until May, until about a month. We still have about a month left for this year, like to start 2021. And then I guess on October 2021, we will start applications for 2022 and so on.
Obviously, if you do want to submit. Sorry?
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I thought you'd finished. Just to say, if you do submit an application after May, it's not a problem. Of course, we can still receive applications, but just for your own kind of sanity and your benefit, it's best to get it in by the end of May if possible, just so you can, plan your arrival, get your visa on time, and not be stressed. And I think that was kind of why me and Ana Maria kind of decided to implement this special deadline specifically for students from Rosario.
Thank you, Keeley. Anyone else? No? Okay.
I thought there was another hand, maybe a Raphael?
I thought so too. Ooh. But it was perhaps the same question. Raphael, did you have a question? Yeah. Yes, your hand is raised again. I think you may unmute yourself now.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I have a question about like the cost of study in there. How much is the cost of living there? Like to study there?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it kind of depends on the accommodation that you choose. So obviously, if you go for a more budget accommodation, the cost of living overall, the average will be a bit lower. And if you go for a kind of more expensive accommodation with a private ensuite and things like that, it will be more expensive. But we say to kind of budget between 12 to up to £18,000 for the living expenses. What I can do is I'll put a link in the chat, which provides you quite a really in-depth summary of the budgeting that you'd need to do for the year. And that would be for everything. So accommodation, living, food, clothes, absolutely everything that you would need to budget for that year. So it's a really good link. So I'll pop it in the chat now if that's okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Keeley. Santiago, do you have a new question? Or is it the same hand as before?
Yes, I have another question. It's just for you, Ana Maria, regarding like the internal process the Rosario University has. I already applied. I already submit my application, but I don't know if I will have an answer from the university, or if just when you get like the final the final resume of your application, that's like all you need.
Yes, in this case, for this particular cooperation agreement, the application is mainly managed by the University of Essex. The only thing that we verify at the beginning with your application is that you comply with our internal requirements in terms of your grades and some other requests that we have. But other than that, we only sort of like make sure that you comply with that, and then wait until you continue with your process with Keeley. Eventually, when you get confirmation from the University of Essex, we do need to be copied in, so we're all in the same page. But yes, I think in this particular case, because it's different from the cooperation agreement with other universities, the application process is mainly done with the University of Essex.
Just to give you an idea in terms of how long it takes for us to reply to an application, currently the admissions team are taking around 3 weeks to turn around an application. So if you don't hear back from them within 3 weeks, please send me an email and I can just chase that up and make sure that everything's okay.
Thank you, Keeley. Okay, another question from, everyone woke up. Good morning, Eliane. Let me help you unmute. You should be able to talk now. Yeah.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I would like to know if the this relation between the Rosario and Essex University implies any kind of scholarship, or if there are like scholarships directly for available to apply with Essex.
Yeah, so as part of this agreement, the University of Essex offers a 20% tuition fee discount to students from Rosario. So that will be automatically applied to your offer letter when you receive an offer from us.
Okay.
However,
And what? Yes. Sorry.
yes, I think you were mentioning probably like financial aid. In that case, there's not a particularly like a financial aid available from the University of Essex or Universidad de Rosario. They do know and have managed procedures before with Colfuturo and ICETEX. If you were to use those two paths, but there's not a scholarship available or a financial aid additionally to the discount that you already received. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Hugo,
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to ask if the admission process and the requirements are the same, no matter if I am applying for the Department of Government, Department of Economics, or the School of Law. The requirements and the process are the same?
Yeah, the process is the same for all of the degrees. You can apply to up to 3 different masters as well if you want to. So if you want to apply to a couple of different ones, then that's fine.
There might be a slight difference in the English test. What, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, actually. Yeah, that's a good point. So for the School of Law, the English requirements are slightly different. So I think it's on the writing component. It's a little bit higher for law. But I mean, that's all in there should be a brochure that I shared, I think, which is on the website, I think. Is that right, Ana Maria? And it has all of the English language requirements on there. So that, yeah, it can change very slightly between master's courses. But apart from that, the process is the same. Yeah.
Thank you, Keeley. Yes, I already sent the link on our university's website where you can find all the agreements details. You can find the brochure as well. You can find the 13 master programs linked to the University of Essex website as well. So it's pretty complete. Have a look through it, and you may find it very useful. Okay, so I think that's pretty much all the questions, because I don't want to take up time from the most interesting part of the session. So if you may, Robert, continue. I think there's no more questions anyway.
Okay, let me share a different screen if I can find it. Which momentarily I can't. I think that's because I didn't stop the slideshow, so just bear with me a sec. Having said, yes, we're all so good at online teaching now after this year. You now sit through 2 minutes of me working out how to share the right thing.
I don't think those things will ever stop happening. Yeah. It's just, it comes with the.
Okay, so now hopefully you can see a what looks like the beginning of a lecture presentation. And I should begin by acknowledging that this is not just my work, it's the work of me and two colleagues. And Christina Stetnitz she's now graduated, but she was a postgraduate student in the department when she worked on it. So this is another example of co-authorship between academic staff and postgrad students of the kind that, as I say, we very much encourage. And it's about post-truth. And you won't need me to tell you that everybody talks about this being the post-truth era. And what you have here is a very wide variety of newspapers from a very wide variety of places, all talking as if it's pretty much a given that we're in a post-truth era. And what I want to talk about is what this means for the group of people that I personally am most interested in my research, which is the citizens, the public. I take it more or less as a given that politicians tell lies somewhere between quite a lot of the time and all of the time. I don't think it's all that controversial to suggest that the politicians sometimes lie. Whether they lie a lot more now than they used to is an interesting question. The phrase post-truth kind of implies that they do, but I'm not sure when the golden age of politician honesty was. I haven't lived through it. But what I'm interested in is more what the people on the receiving end of this kind of thing think. Because there's something in the phrase post-truth that implies that we've all stopped caring whether things are true. And I think that sounds dubious to me. I haven't stopped caring whether things are true, and I suspect that nobody here has stopped caring whether things are true. And you might be familiar with this, what in media and communications research they call the third person effect, where with advertising, for example, if I'm having a chat with one of you, I say, do you think I'm affected by advertising? And you'll say, no, I don't think you're affected by it. And I'll say, and actually, I don't think you're affected by it. But do you think people are affected? Oh yeah, people are affected by advertising. We're not, but people are. And I think there may be something similar going on with this post-truth, where we're ready to say that the public doesn't care anymore about whether things are true, even though this is not something we would dream of saying about ourselves. So this is the area I want to look at. What do we know about what the public thinks about the facts? Has the public accepted, as one of the headlines there says, that we're in an era of fact-free politics? Or is the problem more that there is disagreement about what the facts are, even though people still absolutely care about what's true, and they don't live from the public point of view in a post-truth era at all? That's the big question. So let's start off with the evidence that things are not looking great from a public commitment to truth point of view. And one of the most famous examples is the fact that people are routinely sharing fake news. They're not just reading it, they're passing it on. And the most popular story in the Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump election was the implausible news that Pope Francis had endorsed Donald Trump for president. You didn't need to know a great deal about Pope Francis to think that that didn't sound all that plausible, but that didn't stop nearly a million people just passing on that Facebook engagement of that particular story. And that was only just one example of that particular bit of fake news. And there's loads of nonsense about the pandemic circulating, and you know all this stuff, that lots of people share a lot of nonsense. Now, what I should have done is asked you this question in a poll or in the chat before showing you the evidence, because it would have been interesting to see where you stood on this. You see in the left-hand side the survey question involved. What percentage of the population in your country do you think are immigrants, that is, people not born in this country? And one of the most common misperceptions is that people wildly overestimate this. And Colombia, I'm sorry to say, is a particularly appalling example of this misperception, where apparently the truth is about 0.3%, 3 in 1,000 people in Colombia are born outside Colombia, but the average citizen of Colombia guesses that it's about 17%, that is 1 in 6 people. And it's slightly better in the UK, but it's the same problem. The truth is about 13% and the average guess is double that. And it's almost unheard of. There are just a couple of countries where this is underestimated. Overwhelmingly, the most common thing is for people to get this wrong. So people share things that aren't true and they believe things that aren't true. This much I'm going to accept very readily. What's more, they take this to extremes at times. You may have come across this story. Donald Trump was convinced that more people came to his inauguration than went to Barack Obama's. Trump's is on the left, Obama's is on the right. It's hard to sustain the fiction that more people went to Trump's based on the photographic evidence, but some people did sustain that fiction. Moreover, some people who, when told that the left was Trump's inauguration and told that the right was Obama's inauguration, and asked which photo has more people in it, some people said, oh, it's the one, there are more people in the one on the left. And of course, the people who said that were people who voted for Donald Trump. They really needed to believe that there were more people at Trump's inauguration to the point where they would sit there and say, yes, when I look at those two photos, there are more people in the one on the left. So all of this is kind of a bit worrying. I'm very ready to accept. And it's kind of scary that there is so much polarization over these things that are like photographic facts. As in, we know that people disagree about issues. We know that people disagree about opinions, matter of, what's the right thing to do. You can disagree about what should we do about climate change. Those are matters of opinion. But the question of whether it's happening is more of a matter of fact, at least in theory. And Dan Kahn, in a series of works of which I've taken a quote from just one, says that what he finds particularly worrying is that there's more disagreement about the facts very often than there is even about the opinions. And this is troubling. And what's more, there's disagreement about the facts that relates to each other. And what I mean by that is, let's say there's some facts about global warming, and then you have some facts about the relationship between gun control laws and gun violence. If those are both matters of fact and unrelated matters of fact, there's no reason why you should be able to predict what somebody believes about one from the other. But of course, we absolutely can. Some people believe a certain set of facts and some people believe a totally different set of facts, and those are governed by what they want to believe. And this wish to believe drives the fourth illustration of this problem, which is that you can tell people, I know you believed that, actually that's not true. And some of those people will then say, okay, I was wrong, but many of them won't. And when they won't change their mind, it's not because the information is less convincing, it's because they really needed to believe what they believed in the first place. And I'm going through this fairly quickly because I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with this. I want to go more into a kind of subtler detail of what we interpret from all of this evidence that people believe a lot of wrong things and stick to those beliefs quite hard. So insofar as there's kind of a theory here, it's we as humans want to be two things. We want to be right, that is, we want our opinions to be correct, we want our beliefs to be accurate, but we also kind of want to have been right all along. So the kind of information we like is information that confirms what we already thought. The kind of information we dislike is the kind that tells us we were wrong. We want to be right, but we don't really want to be right if that means changing our mind. And there's a constant tension between those two wishes. Cold, rational accuracy in the blue, and hot red, tell me I was right because it makes me feel good, confirmation on the right. And I can't think of a better simple definition of post-truth than the idea that people have stopped caring so much about the blue and they just want the red. That seems to me what the post-truth era is saying. It's like people don't care about being right anymore. They just care about feeling that things are emotionally and politically on their side. But as I said, I don't think if I asked you, you would say you've stopped caring about being right. I don't think you would think that all you do when you look at information is say, does this support me? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I'm a machine. I still believe it. No problem. It's just not how kind of we seem. So how do we reconcile all the evidence that I've just shown that kind of that makes things look scary and post-truth with the fact that I don't think we as human beings think of ourselves as people who don't care about being right anymore? What do we make of this? Well, what is happening out there? What do we have evidence from public opinion studies that tells us? Well, we know that there is this widespread thing called motivated reasoning. That is, when we receive information and when we process information and when we remember information, we tend to welcome the stuff that tells us that we were right. Confirmation bias is another term for this same thing. So we know it's the case that people are not objective and unbiased when they get information. But the crucial point is the bit in the bold. That is, if somebody does this, it's not that they're sitting there thinking, well, the truth is this, but I want to believe this. No, motivated reasoning leads them to say, this is wrong, whatever you say. This is true, what I believed all along. So it's not like people are saying, yeah, what I believe and what is true are totally different things. No, we kind of still believe this stuff to be true. In other words, we don't accept that there is this battle between accuracy and confirmation, like on the last slide. We do whatever is necessary to make accuracy and confirmation look like the same thing. Oh, it's great because what I believed is true. It's the facts, it's right. We don't really have evidence, at least not yet, of what you might call genuine post-truth reasoning. That is this thing where you say, yeah, I believe this. It's now clear that that's wrong, but I still believe it. That's what I would say is real post-truth. Now, you might say, well, of course, that's ridiculous, Rob. Nobody's going to say that. Nobody's going to believe it. And if you would say that, then I'll kind of say, well, yeah, fair enough. Then we agree that there isn't post-truth in that sense. Because it just seems to me that that's what post-truth means. It's like we don't care anymore what's true, as opposed to we have ways of believing to be true things that we want to believe. It's clear that that happens, but do we have this situation where people, in the words of the bottom line here, recognize that there's a clash between accuracy, what is true, and what they want to believe, and just can accept that those are different things? Like, here's what I believe, here's what's true, they're different, I'm not going to bring them together, I'm just going to be post-truth and say, truth doesn't matter to me, I just want to believe this. Is that going to happen? Well, let's see. If you go along with my interpretation of this, my interpretation of the phrase post-truth, then, you would agree with me that if we're going to call the public post-truth, we need more than just knowing that they're sometimes wrong, because if they're wrong but they believe this stuff sincerely, then that's not post-truth, in my opinion. That's just being wrong, and people have always been wrong. And we would need more than just them saying, oh, I don't believe those things you're telling me, because that's, again, it's still people believing that they're right and resisting what they take to be wrong information. If we're going to say that the public is post-truth, I want to see them doing some of this kind of thing. That is them saying, right, yeah, actually, the facts apparently are this, but I'm going to ignore that. Or they're going to say things like, oh yeah, you call that a fact, but really it's just a matter of opinion. It's just a matter of opinion whether global warming is happening. It's not scientific. It's just some people believe it and some people don't, and that's fine. And the phrase that you hear a lot these days is, "This is my truth." And that's also a bit of a post-truthy kind of thing, and we can kind of understand that Meghan Markle might have a different truth from Prince Charles, but it kind of feels a bit more worrying to say, yeah, Donald Trump's truth is that there's no such thing as man-made climate change, and Joe Biden's truth is that there is, and that's fine, because they've both got their truth. That's kind of post-truth, but is that where we are? And another famous phrase was used by, I can't remember which of, because they kept changing so often, but one of Donald Trump's spokespeople said, "Oh, those are some facts, but our alternative facts are these." And that was another great illustration of post-truth within the Trump administration. But my guess is most members of the public were like, what are you talking about, alternative facts? But if I'm wrong, and it's a post-truth public, they should be very comfortable with the idea, yeah, there are alternative facts. That's a post-truth public. So do we see a post-truth public? Well, that's what the research that I'm going to talk about was designed to test. This looks fairly unpleasant, but I'll be going through it in stages, so don't panic too much about having to remember it all at this point. It's a survey experiment. And by a survey experiment, I just mean a situation in which you do a standard public opinion survey, but at some point within it, a random group of people get some information, whereas another group of people don't get that information, and then we observe the effect. So it's just like a randomized controlled trial of a COVID vaccine. Some people are getting it, some people are getting a placebo, and then we want to see the effect of getting the treatment. In this survey, everybody did 1, 2, 5, and 6. In fact, everybody did 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. And what I mean by that is, we asked everybody some background stuff that we don't care about. Then we got their views on 4 statements about immigration, statements of fact, on which we know that people are often wrong. Then we got some boring looking professor figure, who you'll see shortly, to say, these are the facts about this, and basically you were wrong with your misperception. Now, a random sample of the sample then were taken to some other bloke who said, oh, don't believe that guy with his facts. You believe what you want to believe. Whereas the control group didn't get that. And then in stage 5, we went back to, well, what do you think now about that thing we asked about in stage 2? And the big question for us is, does somebody saying post-truth type stuff in stage 4 make people willing to say, actually, yeah, I'm going to reject those facts because I believe this post-truth world? And finally, we had some questions that are a bit scary towards the end. Literally, were just direct attempts to get people to say post-truth things. So let me just go through that in slightly more detail. Here are 8 statements. The first 4 are about immigration. Apologies if the type is quite small, but the gist is these 2 are facts about immigration that are more in a kind of liberal direction. That is, people who don't like immigration don't think they're true, but actually they are true. No, sorry, they're false. Let me get this right. I need to get my liberal conservative the right way round. So all of these statements are false. The first 2 are false things that liberals want to believe. And the second 2 are false things that more conservative anti-immigration people want to believe. Sorry, that took me far longer probably than it did you to work out. And the crucial point about this is the statement that, or I mean, it could have been more than one statement, but nearly everybody thought that these were true because they are common misperceptions. And when the one that they said was most true was the one that we then used for them in the survey, because what we wanted to do is take something that was wrong that people really believed and test it. So whatever your highest score was on one of those 4 statements becomes the basis for what you'd get in the survey. And what you get next in the survey is this boring professor telling you you're wrong about this. And we gave this person a pretty impressive CV of the kind that an Essex master's degree would be the gateway to for you guys. And then this person did a rather, not too long, but rather boring with a graph kind of, this is basically, all of these started with this statement is false. And obviously the information depended on which statement we were dealing with. But the gist was, here's a fairly boring piece of text and a fairly boring graph to say that that's wrong. That thing you believed, it's wrong. I'm a professor, I'm boring, I deal in facts, you were wrong about that. That's the basis of this factual correction. Now, as I said, some people just got this, giving us an idea of how useful factual corrections are in changing people's minds. But this is appearing in a strange order, so let me make sure it's all visible. Then the treatment people in this experiment, these are the people who were getting the real vaccine, not the placebo, they got somebody who was going to say to them, oh, ignore that previous guy, you believe what you want to believe. And there were 2 ways in which we varied this treatment. One is that some people got told that it was a retired professor and some people got told that it was a newspaper columnist. Our theory was that the retired professor would carry a lot of weight, whereas the newspaper columnist would be ignored. In fact, that didn't happen at all. It didn't matter what the person had done. To my great pain, professors have no more authority than newspaper columnists. So I'm not going to talk any more about that. Suffice to say, this is just a bloke with a beard saying, oh, don't worry about that previous guy. What we did vary, though, is the kind of stuff this person said to see whether there are different types of messages that persuade people to ignore facts. So the first one was more based on the fact that, oh yeah, of course, these professors, they're all liberal, they've all got their own agenda, they're not unbiased, so they can have these graphs, but basically it's just what they want you to believe. That was version 1. Version 2 was a common thing that you hear where people say, well, yeah, your graph might say this, but when I'm out on the streets, and this is the kind of thing we can imagine people in that earlier survey about the amount of immigration saying, because we all have a tendency to notice people who look different, we're all like, what do you mean only 0.3% of people are immigrants? Like, I'm seeing them everywhere. That's the kind of thing that the second version of this was supposed to try and persuade people to say. That your graph might tell you one thing, but that's not the world I live in. And then the third one, which was the most pure version of what we would call a post-truth thing, where the guy with the beard says, oh, there's so many statistics out there that who knows what to believe. In that case, it's best to trust your instincts, even if it looks as if the facts are different. So we were really interested in whether people hearing that would go, yeah, actually, let's just trust our instincts, forget about the facts. Then they got the same question again, and we basically said to them, you know, do you stand by what you said? And this was quite, you know, by survey standards, this is a little bit kind of in your face for respondents, like, you were wrong, we've told you you're wrong, are you still wrong? And so in a way, it's hard to know whether we were too heavy in terms of how we presented this to people. But anyway, you can judge from the results as well. And then we had these questions, this was at the end of the thing, where we asked people at the start, sometimes people see a difference between what they believed. This was being nice, basically. Sometimes people see a difference between what they believed was true and then what the statistics say. And we gave them a chance to say whether they thought the statistics were as they'd expected. And then we gave them a chance in the middle question you see there to choose this statement. The statistics are probably right, but I believe something else. And this was us basically looking for a post-truth statement, right? As well as having a chance to say the statistics changed my mind or whatever. And then the final question in the whole survey was, how much would you agree or disagree with the following statement? It's okay to disagree with the facts if that's what you believe. And this is what I think is post-truth. Like if people agree with that, I'll believe that there's a post-truth public. So the key results. Did it make a difference when we got the first boring professor with the beard? I think he had a beard. Anyway, you remember the boring professor with the graphs. Did he persuade people that they were wrong? This is what people thought before they'd read any correction. So the initial version of the question, and people are obviously skewed towards believing that these things are true. And that is what we expected because we chose things that we knew that lots of people thought were true. What happens when they've been told by Mr. Boring that it's not true? Well, it changes a lot of minds. You do get a few people who are still saying, no, it's definitely true. I don't care what he said. But lots of people have moved across to definitely false. And quite a few people have moved into the middle ground of, well, I'm not sure what I believe now. So telling people facts makes a difference. So we're certainly not in a pure post-truth world where it's irrelevant what you say to people. And you see this in a lot of research. Sometimes you find that it, in the phrase backfires, that is, people actually resist so actively they go in the other direction. But mostly, if you tell people that they're wrong in a boring, factual way, some of them, many of them change their mind. But what we really want to know is, did the effect of that boring factual correction, was that undone? Was it at least partly reversed when people then got the real beard guy saying, oh, ignore that boring graph man? And the answer is, it does. What you've got here is the data I've just shown you, just summarized. So now, rather than showing you the whole scale from 0 to 6, I'm just giving you the average on that 0 to 6 scale. 4.89 before the correction, average belief, down to 3.19 after they've been told the boring stuff. But if they got the fact-free intervention, that is the beard guy saying, oh, ignore that, the changes is less noticeable. Now, this is not a huge difference. And so the first boring graph guy was more powerful than the second beard, don't worry about it guy. But the second beard guy did have an effect because that orange column is noticeably and statistically significantly, for those who like that kind of language, higher than the yellow column. And it's basically about 30% of the effect of the correction is undone or reversed by getting the that fact-free intervention. Now, whether you would say, well, that's kind of worrying because I don't think he should have had any effect at all, or whether you say, well, actually, that's kind of good news because most of the positive effect of the correction stayed in place, is kind of a matter of taste, really, or as a matter of what you expected about post-truth. But anyway, that's the situation. About 30% of the good work of the facts can be undone by somebody saying, oh, don't listen to those facts. What's kind of interesting, though kind of disappointing from a researcher's point of view, is that it didn't really matter that much what they said. So these 3 columns are the orange one now subdivided according to whether you were criticizing the source, or whether you were saying, oh, that's not what you experience in your real world, or whether you were saying the pure post-truth thing, which is, there's so many facts around, it's better to just go with what you believe. It doesn't really make much difference. In other words, they all had an effect. They all were able to reverse some of the positive effect of a factual correction. And as I said, it didn't matter who said it. It didn't matter whether they were a newspaper columnist or a professor. So it does kind of feel as if some people are really ready to ignore the facts, and they just need somebody to say, yeah, it's fine to ignore the facts. How did that work then? Is it that people started to believe that it was okay to kind of ignore the facts? Well, not really. What you've got here is, you might remember I showed you that question. For those people who said, oh, actually, I believed this, and then the facts said something different, we gave them these 3 options. Well, what did you do about that? Did you change your mind? Did you just reject the statistics, or did you go with this post-truth? Yeah, I think the statistics are right, but I believe something different. And the people who got the second beard guy, what happened to them was that they were actually just much more likely to say, no, the statistics are wrong. Second beard guy has persuaded me that these weren't the facts. It's not that they suddenly started believing in large numbers, the statistics are probably right, but I believe something different thing. The second guy gave them something with which they felt able to reject the statistics. Now you might say, well, kind of, that's a scary number of people who believe that statistics probably right, I believe something different in the first place. Yeah, maybe the second beard guy didn't persuade them, but some people didn't need persuading. Lots of people seem to just believe that anyway. And that is kind of scary. But at least that wasn't what the post-truth messages seem to do. And then the final, and in my view, the scariest thing in the whole survey, this is just this statement that I said was the last one in the survey. How do you feel about the statement, it's okay to disagree with the facts if that's what you believe? And about 2/3 of people agree with that statement. Just a straightforward statement, which to me looks wrong, and I would say strongly disagree, but a lot of people, and this is, I should have mentioned, by the way, a large and representative sample of the British public. I should have said that this was a British sample that we were working with. That's about 66% of British people who say it's okay to disagree with the facts if that's what you believe. And obviously part of my job here is to persuade you to come to Britain, but it's only fair to warn you that you're coming to a country where a lot of people believe that. I suspect it wouldn't be very different in other countries, but it's not. It's not my dream home country, in that respect at least. So I'll briefly summarise, and then I'll raise 1 or 2 points for discussion, and then there'll be time for questions. So, as I mentioned, about 1/3 or 30% of the effect of a factual, graph, boring stats correction can be just undone like that by somebody saying, oh, yeah, of course they say that, but you carry on believing what you wanted to. But we don't really have evidence that that's because people in this thing I keep insisting on were like, here's the facts, here's what I believe, they're different, but this is staying like that. The way it worked was not that people stopped believing the facts, it's that they stopped believing that what the boring statistics guy said were the facts. They stopped believing in his statistics, they stopped believing that they were the truth. But even if you agree with me that we didn't really see the most direct evidence of a post-truth mindset here, I have to acknowledge that there was strong evidence of a post-truth mindset elsewhere in the survey. And as I said, I kind of find this mildly horrifying that 2/3 of people agree with that statement. Apologies, by the way, if you also agree with it, because you will now be offended by me telling you that it's scary that people think that. You're more than welcome to challenge me in the Q&A on my own mindset. Now, I mentioned that how we interpret these results does depend a little bit on what you expect. It's a familiar phrase, is the glass half full or half empty? That's a matter of point of view. In this case, it's more kind of like, is the glass 2/3 full? That is, most of the effect of the corrections stayed. Or is it 1/3 empty because it's kind of scary that 1/3 of the positive effect of corrections was just got rid of by one guy with a beard? There's an interesting point that we need to explore more in the survey, which is who are that group of people? Who is that 1/3 of people that can be just persuaded away from facts? Is it a particular demographic group? Is it people who are less educated? Is it people who are more educated because they think they know everything? Is it, I have a kind of suspicion that it's more likely to be men than women, but that is yet to be tested. It tends to be that men are more convinced that they're right on the whole. But there's all sorts of interesting questions about who are these resistant people. And then there are these more deep questions, which is, maybe it's the case that this thing I keep saying, like there's the facts and then what you believe. And I think it's possible that people do have those as different things, but as soon as you confront them with the difference, they find a way of closing it. So it's one of these frustrating things for a researcher where it may be that just by doing the research on that thing, you remove the phenomenon that you're trying to explore. There's probably some scientific term for this, where there's a phenomenon out there, but as soon as you try and observe it, it disappears. And I think that may be a possibility in this kind of territory. But anyway, you've listened to me for more than long enough today already. So I'll stop there and hopefully get your questions and comments on what I was talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Jones. I am looking if anyone is willing to talk. I mean, we do know that it's slightly harder for our students to do it in English, but this is a safe space. You're encouraged. I'm happy to translate if you don't know a term in English. Also, I don't know whether you want to talk about our domestic also experience with post-truth in Colombia at portas of our election year next year for Colombia and a few other countries in Latin America, Ecuador, I think as well. Peru has been going through a rough patch. Cool. Okay, so we've got Santiago. Go ahead. I think you can talk now.
Yes. So what I got like from the summary and the conclusions was like there's no actual direct evidence that people have a post-truth mindset, but there's potential for it, right? So what can be like the barrier? What's stopping people if they got a potential for getting this post-truth mindset? What is stopping them from actually having this post-truth behavior? I don't know if I was really clear.
Yeah, it was clear. It's a difficult question. Because it has several dimensions. I think we can think about this from a kind of what a political system would look like that would work against post-truth. And then we can think of it from a maybe slightly more narrow, what other institutions can help. So by a political system, I mean, it's no coincidence that post-truth has arisen at a time of considerable ideological polarization in a lot of places. And the US is the most celebrated, or not the anti-celebrated, most notorious case of this, but there are many others. And in the UK, we had our disagreements about Brexit, and in Brazil, it's massively polarized, for example. And so I have no great solution to what you do about polarization, but I can confidently say that if you achieve a more depolarized kind of environment within politics, you help people to accept that some facts are not consistent with what they wanted to believe. And I think this is a really important point in the sense that, and this is a problem for research like mine, which is that when the Trump supporters were in that poll and they were saying, no, there are more people in that photo, I don't think that they were seeing the photos very differently from us. I think they were thinking, right, I'm on Trump's team. This person wants to get me to admit something. I bet they're from the other team because they're a pollster or they're an academic, even worse. And so they're part of the liberal Trump hating establishment. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I'm a bit skeptical that there is that much post-truth, as in the fact that somebody will say something that's obviously nonsense, like there are more people in this photo. It's political, it's ideological. It's not a matter of cognition or perception. It's a matter of what you're willing to admit in public. This is going to turn into a long and rambling answer to a question, hopefully somewhere near yours. Santiago. The second thing I wanted to talk about is fact checking, and it's related. And I think that is our other big barrier potentially to our other way of stopping the potential for post-truth being realized, is to have more and more established and more prominent fact checkers. And it's absolutely crucial that we have fact checkers from both sides of whatever political divide that are willing to say, I mean, so you need for example, in the US context, you need a Republican or a conservative fact checker. And most of the time they'll be checking the supposed facts of Biden or Ocasio-Cortez or whoever. But also every so often they will say, but actually this thing that Trump said is not true. Because it's only when it really comes from your own side that you are most kind of persuaded. So I think, yeah, those are kind of like the institutional things, whether it's the polarization of the system or things like fact checkers that prevent post-truth that post-truth potential being realized. Feel free to come back to me if that was not a satisfactory answer to your question, because I have my doubts.
Thank you, Robert. Stephanie, I think you can talk now.
Yes, now I can speak. Mine is more like, how do you say that we can like make strategies to make people trust in statistics again? Because I think that, for example, the disagreement in the scientific community makes people like distrust in all the statistics that are out there, because sometimes they can like contradict each other. And I think that it can be related to, there are times that like investigations can be biased by themselves. And we can see it, for example, here in Colombia with election polls, because, for example, they cannot be doing a correct sampling or just choosing a specific demographic to do it. So it doesn't reflect what people are really seeing. So what do you think that is like a good strategy to help people like believe in statistics again?
That's a really good question. I mean, and there are two answers, I suppose, a two-stage answer. And the first one is you've already more or less given in your own example, as in, it's obviously absolutely essential that those people who are putting statistics into the public domain are doing it properly, because otherwise the reputations of all people putting statistics into the public domain will be destroyed. And opinion polls are a great example of this. I mean, there are often good reasons why it's very difficult to do good opinion polling, and my guess is that Colombia is an example of this, because my guess is that in certain rural areas it's incredibly difficult to do polling, or it's certainly difficult to find a method that is relatively cheap that can poll across the country satisfactorily. And in those situations, you know, you have to be very clear about the limitations, and you have to say things which is, I think this is virtually impossible in opinion polling. And I think the fault of that lies at least partly with politicians who kind of process and mediate these polls. But the pollsters themselves have at least to say, we can't be sure about this. You know, one of the most important things about opinion polls is that in most countries, the headline figure is less interesting than the change since the last time they did it using the same method. But that's not something that is widely communicated. But let's assume that the people who are producing statistics are doing it in the best way that they can and actually producing pretty valid statistics. The depressing part of my answer is I think it's actually really difficult to do more than that. And I think that there will still be criticism. And here opinion polling is not such a good example, because actually doing opinion polling correctly, if you have the right context, is doable. The really difficult stuff is things like, well, what is the effect of lockdown on COVID death tolls and the death tolls from diseases other than COVID-19? Like, it's clear that it reduces COVID deaths, but it's clear that it increases deaths for other reasons. But the research question of which of those, how do they outweigh each other, is almost impossible to answer. And the problem is that the public cannot distinguish between things like opinion polls telling you 48% of people believe this from complex social science or epidemiological research questions like the one I just described. And I think there's nothing we can do really to stop the public lumping it all into a category called statistical nightmares and deciding whether they want to say, well, I'm going to put as much trust as I can, or whether I'm just going to reject it. And I think the only other thing I would say about this, and it's hardly a positive thing, is that I don't think there was ever a golden age. I don't think there was ever an age where the public were like, oh yeah, thanks for that graph, I agree. I think we've always been in a situation where there was a kind of ongoing war between people trying to put statistical information into the public domain and people resisting it, accepting it if they like it, all of that kind of stuff. These are miserable answers and their implications.
Thank you, Jen. I don't see any other questions, so I'll put mine instead, if nobody wants to take advantage. But I'm wondering if you can assume that that person that has been just told, you know, like, you're not right, and has decided to still believe what she or he believes is that, can we assume that that person definitely is going to go and say and vote for Donald Trump, for example? Or is there like a space in the middle to say, well, I didn't want to admit to you that was wrong, but it did make me think in my own personal time and in my own personal space, well, maybe, you know, let me have a little bit more a look into what I was told, and perhaps eventually change their mind. But they obviously are not going to admit to you and to all those doctor, PhD, and so on, that they were wrong in public. Can we assume that that's going to translate if we were talking about political scenarios and elections and so on?
That's another very good question. And the first honest answer is that I don't know. And that's because here we really come to the limitations of what a method like the one that I showed can do. I mean, it is possible to go back to people, let's say a week after an experiment, and to see whether the effects that you managed are kind of decaying away or are still there. And it varies quite a lot, interestingly, across different experiments. But I can do more than just don't know. And that's to say, it depends critically on whether, on what are the sources of that resistance to correction. Clearly, one of the sources is political and ideological. And I think it's unlikely that what you suggested, that where people will kind of slowly come to accept, even if they don't admit it in the survey, will slowly come to accept something. Because if we assume that the mechanism is that they really don't want to believe it for political reasons, then that should still remain the case. But I think, and the evidence suggests, that there's also a more kind of, and this is a bit what I was getting at with the potential gender difference here, there's also a part of human beings that, regardless of politics, don't like being wrong and don't like admitting that they're wrong. And I think insofar as that is what's driving people's resistance, I do have more optimism that can, when the heat of the survey is over, the people will say, oh, well, yeah, maybe. And that hopefully would update their political thinking. Just one other quick thing, which I didn't mention during the talk, but is maybe relevant for this. We didn't find that it was the conservative people who were more resistant than the liberal people.
Oh, good to know. Yeah, that's a cool fact.
Both groups showed the same kind of thing, which, I mean, it's consistent with it being either an ideological or a personality thing. But we find this quite a lot. Personality psychologists have this thing called open-mindedness. And you find that people who call themselves open-minded or answer questions that make them look open-minded, they're much more likely to be liberal. But they're not open-minded at all when it comes to politics. They're just as closed-minded as conservative people.
you can be open-minded in many different areas, I guess.
You
Maybe
certainly
some
can.
in some you can, and some others. But certainly, being an international campus such as Essex, it's a great opportunity to develop open-mindedness. I mean, I studied in the UK, and that made a huge difference for me in terms of broadening my perspectives.
Excellent.
Okay, anyone else? We are approaching the end of this event. We've got a couple of minutes left with Professor Jones and with Keeley as well, if there were questions on that side. If not, you're going to find the recording of this class and event in our YouTube channel probably next week. So you can share it among your students or your friends that didn't attend. We know that many of our students have lessons, of course, during this time, so that might be the reason. Okay, well, I see no extra questions. Thank you very much for coming. Any final remarks from Professor Jones or Keeley before we finish? Thank you very much for being here.
Only thank you for coming.
Yeah, same for myself. Yeah, thanks for being here. And yeah, it's always nice to hear. You guys are always really participative in these sessions, so it's really nice. So yeah, thank you. And if you do have any questions, I think you've all got my contact, so feel free to get in touch.
Well, that's it. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend and a nice Friday evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Speak soon. Thank you.